Doug Shain here, BanksterDFS.com, and Bankster DFS presents Bankster University NFL Cash Games 101, where I'm going to take you through my cash game strategy, how I build a cash game lineup, and we're going to take a look at the cash game lineup I'm going to build for Week 13 of the 2020 NFL season. If you're watching it this weekend, super relevant. If you're not, well, at least the stats are there, and we're going to figure out how to build a cash game lineup, what my strategies are, what our goals are, and how we go about doing that. We're going to take a look at a cash game pool, and we're going to talk about how we build our lineup from that. If you have any questions or you have anything you'd like to comment on, please make sure to drop a comment. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, and click that notification icon so you know whenever we are putting up new videos. We do go live every Friday night at 7 o'clock with an NFL First Look, and every Sunday morning, 11:30 a.m. Eastern, live till lock for the NFL season, and then we'll have some NBA and I'm sure NHL and MLB as those seasons come around as well, and who knows what else we're going to put on there. So just subscribe to our YouTube channel, and then you'll be able to see all the videos when we put them out there. Also, you can subscribe to BanksterDFS.com. $3.99 a week gets you all of our content, articles, player pools, Slack chat, for every sport we cover. We cover them all. Pro sports, college sports, niche sports, $3.99 a week gets you everything. But enough about that. I'll promo again at the end of this video, and you can, click on to BanksterDFS.com at that point. But for now, let's talk cash games. So when I talk cash games, we're talking any game that's going to pay about 50% of the field. We can go all the way down to 33% of the field triple ups. But when I'm talking about my build, I'm talking about true double ups where half the field gets all the prize pool, and everyone gets the same amount, whether you finish first or a 50th percent. So let's say it's a 100-person cash game pool. Number 1 through number 50 is going to get the same double of their entry fee. That's all it is. And that's what a cash game is. That's how you build a bankroll. You play 80% of your games as cash, 20% is tournaments or GPPs, and we have a video for that as well. But for cash games, you want to play 80%. 80% of your bankroll for a week or your weekly bankroll should be played in cash games with those double ups. And that's what you use to build your bankroll in order to play those GPPs to take a shot at the Millie Maker or some of those bigger prizes. But, the more you're playing cash, the more you're going to see that bankroll build because we're playing safe. That's what cash games are all about. So let's talk about some basic math for cash games. 50% of the field gets paid generally. 150 points, you're pretty safe. There were a couple of weeks in the 2020 season where 150 points wasn't going to be good enough. There was a week where 190, I think, was the cash line because all the chalk went off. And by chalk, I mean the players that were highest owned. That's generally not what's going to happen. There are some weeks this year where 120 points has made the cash line. But if you shoot for 150 points on DraftKings, you're probably going to be safe for cash games. What that means is we're looking for every player to get in our lineup to get 3 points for every $1,000 in salary that they are. There's $50,000 in salary. If we divide that by 1,000, we get 50. 50 times 3 is 150. So if a player is $5,000, we want 15 points out of them. Generally, we play with those numbers a little bit. We prefer our quarterbacks to get 4x. So if a $5,000 quarterback, good luck finding that. But a $5,000 quarterback we'd want 20 points out of. Whereas your defense, if you can get 1.5 to 2.5 times what you got, a $2,500 defense, shoot, if you get 5-6 points out of that, you're real happy. You're just trying not to go negative. And even if we do go negative, the money we're going to spend on defense, if we spend down, that's one of our guidelines we're going to talk about later. If the money you save there could be enough to get a player that's a 3x player versus a 4.5x player. If you can go from Mitch Trubisky to Pat Mahomes because you're spending down a defense, that's worth the difference, even if your defense gets a -4. We'll talk defensive strategy in a little bit. But look, let's talk about our main goal. Our main goal in cash games, find as many players as we can who are going to reach or exceed value. If you do that, you're going to cash more often than not. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do, but we've got some guidelines that'll help us get there. We're going to break down those guidelines. I think I have 8 guidelines that we're going to talk about that help us build a cash game. We're going to go through those guidelines, and I'm going to bounce back and forth between my guidelines and DraftKings. And eventually, the last slide, we're going to build our cash game lineup, and we're going to take a look and see how I put together my pool and my lineups and how we take all those guidelines and put it together for what is hopefully a cashing lineup. So guideline number 1, consistency over upside. Let's talk about consistency and upside. And I'm going to pull 2 players from the 2020 season, Tyler Lockett of the Seattle Seahawks and Allen Robinson of the Chicago Bears. Tyler Lockett is the flashier player. Tyler Lockett has far more upside than Allen Robinson. Allen Robinson, for lack of a better term, is a boring NFL player. But if we're playing cash games, I'm taking Allen Robinson. almost every time over Tyler Lockett. So let's take a look at why. Let's look at Tyler Lockett for the season. For the season, Tyler Lockett is averaging 18.3 fantasy points per game. That's a really good season. He has 8 touchdowns on the year, and he's putting up a real nice looking average line. 19 points a game at home, 17 points per game on the road. But here's where Tyler Lockett becomes a not very good cash game play because, again, we want consistency over flash, okay? And look at Tyler Lockett's points per game. We're going to look at this line down on the right here. We're going to look at his points per game on a week-by-week basis. 5, 22, 12, 8, 7, 56, 8, 6, 40, 19.7, 17.2. See a lot of roller coastering there. It's up and down and up and down and up and down. You do not know what you're going to get week to week with Tyler Lockett. You could get the boom game. Love him for a tournament because he can pop off for 40. He can pop off for 56. And I'll tell you right now, this week in week 13 of the NFL 2020 NFL season, I have him as a tournament play for sure because the Giants have a good starting cornerback, Bradbury, who is going to possibly lock down DK Metcalf, though that's difficult. And when DK Metcalf has rough games, Tyler Lockett has really strong games. So I like him as a tournament option, but we've seen some weeks when we thought they were going to shut down DK Metcalf. This week 12 game was one of them where we thought that Darius Slay was going to shut down Metcalf, and it didn't happen. DK Metcalf went off for like 11 catches and 170-something yards, and Lockett did garbage. That's not good. That's not what we're looking for in a cash game. The game against Buffalo, Week 9, Buffalo, we thought Tre'Davious White would shut down DK Metcalf, and Buffalo is terrible against the slot in the 2020 season. Tyler Lockett plays in the slot quite a bit. He had 8 points. A lot of people, we considered him strongly for cash games that week, and I didn't use him, thank goodness, because it's just that lack of consistency. But boy, those boom games pull that average up. That if it's not for that 56 and that 40, he's not sitting at 18 points per game. Now let's take a look at Allen Robinson. Allen Robinson, who's a little bit cheaper, by the way, which I love. Forget the questionable tag for the week. We're just talking about him as a player. 17.3 points per game. A little bit less consistent, a few less touchdowns, so 3 less touchdowns than Lockett this year. Ton more targets, though. Same amount of catches, though, so his catch rate is awful. That's because he has terrible quarterbacks, Nick Foles and Mitch Trubisky, but, still has the same number of catches, but he's seeing a whole boatload of targets. And let's look at his performances. He doesn't have a 40 or 50-point upside necessarily. But look at what he does have. 27, 10, 15, 21, 11, 10, 19, 26, 31, 6, 12. That's a lot of games in double digits. Only one game under double digits. And most of his games have been 12 or more points this year. Quite a few. Listen, do I want $10,000 or $10,000? I love $10,000. Do I want 10 points at Allen Robinson? No. And I'm probably not playing Allen Robinson in cash this week, though he is in my cash game pool. But I do think that Allen Robinson versus Tyler Lockett, I'm getting a week-to-week more consistent performance. And in a cash game, in a game where we want to cut down on our variance. Variance is bad. We want consistency. I will take Allen Robinson, whose flow chart is like this in terms of scores, as opposed to the up and down roller coaster that is Tyler Lockett. Never playing Allen Robinson in a tournament. Never is a strong word. I'm rarely playing Allen Robinson in a tournament. Playing Tyler Lockett a lot in that tournament because he has that boom capability. Robinson's not a big boom guy, but he's a consistent guy, and he's probably not going to sink your lineups either. A 12-point game is a lot easier to stomach than a 5-point game, especially when I'm saving $700 for the higher score. I'll take that more consistent score. So we're going for consistency over upside. Guideline number 2. And please understand these are guidelines, not rules. We can break our guidelines if need be. But in this case, we like to stick to them as much as possible. Guideline number 2, I want touches over touchdowns. Sounds kind of funny. Touchdowns are how we get points. But touchdowns are the hardest thing in fantasy to predict. Think about Jerome Bettis towards the end of his career. Guy was putting up 10 touchdowns a year, but he was doing it on very few carries. And he wasn't getting a lot of yards. Jordan Howard, at the beginning of the 2020 season, was getting the touchdowns the first 3 games for Miami, but he wasn't getting the touches. I take Myles Gaskin over Jordan Howard any day of the week because Gaskin was getting almost 20 touches a game and Howard was getting 2. And he'd get a touchdown. But touchdowns aren't the way to go. But let's talk about a less obvious example than a Myles Gaskin who's getting all the carries for the Dolphins except for inside the 5 early in the season versus Jordan Howard, who is garbage. Let's talk about James Robinson and Nick Chubb. They're both great players. I love Nick Chubb. I think Nick Chubb's one of my favorite tournament plays every single week because he has the ability, outside of Derrick Henry, he's one of the most likely players in the NFL to go for 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. But Nick Chubb is very touchdown dependent. And here's where we take a look at what percentage of his points, and we're not going to do the math on this, but we can kind of get a good idea. What percentage of Nick Chubb's points come from him scoring touchdowns? Would he have come close to value? And I say close, I'm like 3-4 points within value, right? If he can get to 2.5x, approaching 3x without a touchdown, he's got enough volume to make me happy. Well, let's talk about what Nick Chubb's looking like. Okay, so week 12, Nick Chubb had just under 30 points. If you take the touchdown away, he's still hitting value. He has 23 points on 7.7K. He needs 23.1 points. He got there. He got there on volume alone, which is great. And he doesn't have to get all the way there for me to feel good about him, but he got there. But let's look at week 11. He rushed for 114 yards, didn't hit value. Not even on that price. If we look at this week's price, good Lord, he didn't get there. But even on that week's price of 7,000, he didn't do it. Houston, he played Houston in week 10. He had a touchdown. If we get rid of the touchdown, he's at 15.6 points. Doesn't come close to hitting value. Against Dallas, he didn't hit value. He got injured in that game. Against Washington, he had 2 touchdowns. You get rid of those touchdowns, he's at 15 points. Doesn't hit value. Cincinnati, 2 touchdowns. You get rid of those 2 touchdowns, he's at 16 points. Doesn't hit value. Is 16 points going to kill you on $6,200? No. 16 points is fine. Like, that's an okay game. It's not a great game. It's an okay game. But let's look at a guy like James Robinson, and let's look at the prices that he was set at. Now, this changes depending upon the games. But James Robinson, week 12 against Cleveland, he had a touchdown. But even if you get rid of the touchdown, he's at 23.9 points. Let's say 24 points. That's almost 4xing his 6.3K salary. That would have hit value on this week's salary, which is up a full $1,000. It's why I'm not playing James Robinson, by the way, in week 13, is because I just think he's gotten to that point where he's finally priced correctly, but we do look for value in that. We'll talk about that later. He did not hit value on a 6K price tag here against Pittsburgh, but against Green Bay, he did not score a touchdown. He didn't hit value, but 16.2 for 6,600. We just said with Nick Chubb, we'd accept it. So I'd accept that for James Robinson as well. 7K, okay, he did not hit value there. He was 9 points without his touchdown in week 9. Week 8, you get rid of his 2 touchdowns. He's still at 22 points. He hits value. Week 7, you get rid of his touchdown. He's at 9 points. Not so much there, but I do like the target volume. Target volume's huge. Week 5, he did not score a touchdown. He didn't really hit value. Week 4 against Cincinnati, he came close. 14.7 is okay. It's not great. Miami, you get rid of those 2 touchdowns, and he's at 18 points. Crushed his value. Tennessee, you get rid of his touchdown. He's at 18 points. Crushed his value. Week 1, he did not. He came close though. He came close. I mean, guy had. It was only 4K, so he only needed 12 points. He almost got there. He got real close there. Point I'm making is James Robinson was getting closer to hitting value without the touchdowns a lot more than Nick Chubb. And there are other examples out there. I mean, again, if you go back to that Miami example and you talk about the Myles Gaskin, we were talking about that. Just there are players out there who are just going to get there in volume alone. Look at Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler hasn't played a ton of games this season because of the injury that he had. But he only has 1 touchdown on the season. But look at what Austin Eckler did last week without a touchdown. Hammered value, almost 4x without a touchdown. He got injured week 4 against Tampa Bay, so I'm not worried about that. Week 3 against Carolina, he did have the touchdown. You take that touchdown away, he's at 25 points. That hit value really is in that $6,800. Week 2 against Kansas City, no touchdown, 18.8 for $6,500. Yep, give me that all day long. Week 1 against Cincinnati, that was a weird game. Tyrod Taylor was the quarterback. The offense was a little bit different. He didn't come close to value, but only got 1 target because Tyrod Taylor doesn't throw to his running backs. We look at the change of situations, that makes a difference. Austin Eckler, maybe that was a better example than James Robinson. And I looked at him. I just didn't think he had enough volume, enough games to really pull the sample. But really, it does show that Austin Eckler, he's hit value without the touchdowns. He doesn't need touchdowns to hit value. I'm going to use Austin Eckler this week in cash over Nick Chubb this week in cash, even though the Titans are a much more generous defense to opposing running backs than the New England Patriots. Why? Because I think I can get there on volume with Eckler. Even if Eckler doesn't score, I don't think he's getting 16 targets, but it's 8 to 10 targets. Sure, that'll be there for Eckler, and he can absolutely get there on value. He's getting the inside the 5 carries. Nick Chubb, how many targets does he have on the season? 6, 7? 1, 2, 3, 4, 7. 7 targets. 3 of them came in 1 game. He's had multiple games with no targets only one game with one or more targets. Those passing game work matters. And Nick Chubb doesn't get it enough, and if he's not going to hit value all that often if he's not scoring touchdowns. It's just not there for him. That's why he's a tournament option, because he does score the touchdowns, but the volatility is there. And if he's not getting in that end zone, you're kind of screwed. Even if he gets 114 yards like he did 2 weeks ago, he only had 14 points, and you're like, man, he had a great game. But he didn't for fantasy purposes because he didn't get in that end zone. He's far too touchdown dependent. We want to try to stay away from touchdown-dependent guys. Now, there are guys who score a ton of touchdowns. That doesn't mean everyone who scores touchdowns shouldn't be there. No, like Devontae Adams scores a ton of touchdowns. He also gets a crap ton of volume. Listen, he hasn't been getting there all that often the last 3 weeks. But for the most part, Devontae Adams, you get rid of the touchdowns, he still is kind of hitting value on a regular basis. Plus, a guy like Devontae Adams has a higher touchdown equity. And so you can factor touchdowns into your decisions, but they shouldn't be the end-all be-all. They shouldn't be the end-all be-all. And that's why I'm taking a guy like James Robinson, a guy like Austin Eckler above Nick Chubb, because their floor is higher because of their target volume, whereas Nick Chubb needs those touchdowns. Guideline number 3, this is just a simple one. Don't worry about ownership. When you're building a tournament lineup, a GPP, and you want to lap the field, you want to find that guy who's going to go under-owned. And it doesn't mean we have to find a 1% 3K guy who hopefully scores a touchdown. I mean, we've had last week, week 12 of the 2020 NFL season, Tyreek Hill was under 10% owned, or right around 10% owned. That was a value play in terms of ownership. I used him in a tournament. Now, we liked him in cash too, but I don't worry about ownership in cash. Like this week, Austin Eckler is going to be 30% in cash. I don't care. It's fine because you're just trying to you don't need to be the top scorer. You don't need to lap the field. You just got to get to your 150 points and you should be okay. Now, obviously, look, we had a week where Devontae Adams had 50 or so points. If you didn't have him in cash, you didn't make the cash line. That was the same week Tyler Lockett went off for like 50 points. And they were both pretty heavily owned in cash. Yeah, sometimes, once or twice a season, that's going to happen, where if you don't have that guy who scores 50 or so points in your cash lineup, you're not going to get there. But you know what? A lot of the times, those guys aren't coming out of left field. If they're chalky plays, if they're going to be highly owned, you're probably going to have them in cash because they're safe plays. We had Dalvin Cook's 40-point games. Of course we had him in cash. There was great matchups. He was getting a ton of volume and he was underpriced. Dalvin Cook was an easy play for cash that second game where he got the game after the Green Bay game. We knew he was going to have a good week. We played him heavily. So it's not often that a guy's going to be a huge score that you have to have him that you don't. That's what we're here for at Bankster also, right? We're not going to send you off on your own. We know where those plays are going to be. We have an idea of where the ownership's going to go, and we're going to follow that ownership if the play's right. This week, for the 2020 season, week 13, and not getting too deep into my cash game, I feel like Aaron Rodgers is going to be there for cash this week. A lot of people are going to be on him. He's underpriced. He's been super consistent all year. I don't care. I'm throwing him in my lineup too. And if he does great. And if he does terribly, well, that's okay too, because everyone has him. So it's not the end of the world if he does poorly. And you'll have enough players in your lineup to differentiate it. So if, you can still move up the field. If Rodgers had a bad week, let's hope he doesn't. But if Rodgers had a bad week, we've got players in there that, will be differentiated. We're not all have the exact same lineup because even 40% ownership on a player means that there's 60% of the field that doesn't have a certain player. So there's room to play around with that. But don't worry about him. He's going to be super high owned. Let's not get him. No, when Taysom Hill was in the week 11 of this season, when Taysom Hill was listed as a tight end on FanDuel, you had to put him in as your tight end on FanDuel. Like there was no not playing him. He was the starting quarterback for the New Orleans Saints. He was 96% owned in cash. But if you didn't have him, you didn't cash. Like those 4% of the people, they didn't cash without Taysom Hill that week. Like you had to have him. So you put him in there. You don't worry about the ownership. You call it a day and move on. Guideline number 4. Don't spend up for defense. Don't spend up for defense. Look, you can find defense that does what we needed to do at the very bottom of the price scale. This week, we've got the Jets. That's our defense that we're going to spend down on this week. You know what? The Miami Dolphins, they've been great all year. They have been. And they've got a great matchup against a backup quarterback for the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Dolphins have been outstanding. But even as an outstanding defense, they had a nice little 3-week run in there where they had 12, 15, and 23. But look, they've also had 2, 3, 8, 6, 5. I mean, those aren't spectacular weeks. Those aren't slate-breaking kind of weeks. Sure, if you didn't have the Dolphins in week 8, we did. But if you didn't have the Dolphins in week 8, Sure, you probably struggled to win a tournament, but you were still, but you could still cash, but they were also a cheap defense. So of course we had the Dolphins that week. And there was other defenses that were priced way higher that you didn't need to have. Here's the thing about defense, right? We use our defense to get us money to spend on real players. The difference between the Dolphins and Jets is $2,300. The Jets are $2,100. The Dolphins are $4,400. What can you do with $2,300? Well, for $2,300, you can go from David Montgomery, who's $5,500, and we like David Montgomery this week. But you can go up to $7,800. That opens up a whole new world of players. You can get James Robinson, you get Austin Eckler. I'd much rather have those guys in a cash game. You've got Adam Thielen at $7,400. Well, who's at $5,100? I mean, you've got Corey Davis. I like Corey Davis a lot this week. But if I can go up to Adam Thielen from Corey Davis just by going from the Dolphins to the Jets, I'm going to do that every day of the week because a defense's upside, the most they're going to score you is what? 20, 23 on a really good week. Most good weeks for defenses are 8 to 12 points. Well, look what the Jets have done the last couple of weeks. They've got a good matchup against the Vegas team that's struggling. The Jets get in the backfield, 7 sacks the last 2 games. They've scored 8 and 9 points for $2,000. $2,000, that's 4x. I just want the Jets to score 2 points, 3 points, and I'm happy. They score 8 or 9 points. I'm actually gaining by using this defense. The lower price defenses are much more likely to hit a 2 to 3 to 4x because they don't need to do as much. And all they need, listen, the cool part about a defense is if they get a special teams or a defensive touchdown, they're right there without having to do anything else on defense. And those are super fluky, super random. The most random thing is a defensive or special teams touchdown. You can't predict those things. So why would I spend up $2,300 more on the Miami Dolphins when I can get the Jets at this price point and then have an extra $2,300 to get real players in my lineup? All we're looking for is pressure. Pressure equals points. If you get in the defensive backfield, you get an opportunity for sacks, fumbles, interceptions, which lead to defensive touchdowns. I don't care how many points are scored against the defense. I don't care how many points a defense or how many yards a defense gives up. The Seattle Seahawks are on pace to give up the most passing yards in a single season in NFL history. So they're a terrible defense, except the Seattle Seahawks have not scored negative once all year, and they've scored 3 points or more every week but one. They don't have as much upside. They've only scored, the top score is only 11, but the Seahawks have never hurt you this year. Now, they're $3,300 this week, so I'm not going to use them, even though they're in my cash game pool, because I love them against the Giants this week. Since Carlos Dunlap signed with the team, they've got 19 sacks over the last 4 weeks. This defense is playing completely different. They've done okay against the pass the last 3 weeks. I'm just not spending $3,300 on it. But if you used them any other week throughout the year when they were under $2,500, you weren't upset about it. 9 points, 5 points, 5 points. Were you upset the last 3 weeks? You weren't. So why are we spending up on defense? It allows you to do other things. Don't spend up on defense. Find teams that sack the quarterback. That's what you want. Teams that get in the backfield. That's all we worry about. A cheap defense that gets in the backfield. Guideline number 5. Matchups matter. Stud players, they say in fantasy, you hear all the time, play your studs. Yeah, in season long, you play your studs. You're never going to sit DK Metcalf in season long. But I don't have to spend $8,200 on DK Metcalf in a bad week. Do I love DK Metcalf? Hell yeah, I love DK Metcalf. He's great. He's a monster. It's one of the most impressive physical specimens I've seen at wide receiver since Terrell Owens. I mean, the guy's a beast. But Patrick Peterson held him to under 14 points. Jalen Ramsey held him to under 5 points. Patrick Peterson held him to 4 points. Some of the best. I mean, look, everyone else he's just hammered. He's hammered everyone else, but the best defensive backs in the league have held him in check. Sometimes. I mean, listen, Darius Slay, Tre'Davious White, they struggled a little bit. But, I mean, Ramsey and Peterson are sometimes playing another level. This week, he's got James Bradberry from the Giants. Bradberry's shut down just about everyone this year. Could DK have a really good week this week? He could. Do I feel comfortable enough in his ability to beat Bradberry to spend $8,200 to put him in cash? No, I don't. I'll use him in the tournament. The upside's absolutely there. But we've seen what happens for him against stud defensive backs, so I'm not using him. There are other options anyway. As it were this week, I don't really like spending up this week on wide receiver. I'd spend up on Thielen. And look, DraftKings is cool. They tell you who's got the good matchups, and there are tools out there that tell you defense versus position. And those things do matter. So I'd rather spend my money this week at other positions, quarterback, running back. Some other weeks I might spend up on a different wide receiver. Maybe I do want to spend up on Devontae Adams if he was in a slightly better matchup. But I don't love that matchup for him either. So I'm not spending the $8,200 on DK Metcalf because I don't have to. I don't have to. We don't have to. This isn't a season-long game. Pay attention to the matchups. Why is David Montgomery a cash game play for me this week? Well, the Detroit Lions have given up the most fantasy points to opposing running backs this year, and David Montgomery has gotten volume. He's had 16 or more touches in every game since Tariq Cohen got injured in week 3. He hasn't done a ton with it. He's been fairly consistent, 11, 12, 18. He had a big week last week with 28. But he's going up against the Lions. I'm not playing him despite his usage and his volume. I'm not playing him against the Buccaneers, who have a really good rush defense. I'm not playing him against the Colts, who can really shut down run games. Against the Lions, the worst defensive team in the league, the most generous team to opposing running backs, yeah, I'm locking in David Montgomery. Why? Matchups matter. I haven't touched Montgomery all year. I didn't touch him in that Green Bay game. I didn't play him in any of these other games that he did well. Where else did he do well? Well, he did do well against Tampa Bay. I was never playing him in that game. He did well against the Giants. Good for him. I wasn't playing him. Matchups matter. Tampa's got a good rushing defense. I wasn't playing him. And he had a good game. Good for him there. But I'm definitely playing him against the Lions because matchups matter. Players do well against certain teams. Certain teams do poorly against certain positions, and you just play teams against. You play the players against them. Not every time, but a guy like Montgomery who's getting volume against a crappy team like the Lions, he's going in there. DK Metcalf, despite his volume at $8,200 against one of the best defensive backs in the league this year, I'm just not doing it. He could have a great game, but I'm not willing to take that chance. We're trying to cut down on variance. We're trying to get rid of questions in our lineup. That's what we do in cash. We want to avoid questions. Guideline number 6, just don't stack in cash. I will accept certain stacks in cash. Like this week in my cash lineup, when we get there, you'll see, I've got Aaron Rodgers and Robert Tonyan. Because Tonyan, the Eagles are pretty bad against the tight end. Tonyan, I think, is a great price. I needed to spend down a little bit at tight end. I had other options at tight end I liked, but in this case, because I entered my cash games into GPPs as well, and you should always enter your cash games into a GPP in case it pops, the correlation there isn't a problem because on his own, independent of everything else, Tunyan's a good play this week. So I don't mind stacking, but I'm not going out of my way to stack. But I'm surely not putting Aaron Jones in this lineup. Not that I'd use Aaron Jones in cash. He's way too variant. I'm not putting Devontae Adams in this lineup. I'm not doing a run back necessarily with Philadelphia. I don't feel like I have to do that. I'm not following my tournament strategies. I'm surely not going to put a running back and receiver from the same team in my cash game lineup. Occasionally, I'll put a running back or receiver with a tight end from the team. But again, that tight end position for me is different. Tight end is much like the defensive position where I'm just trying to save money. Who can I get 5 to 6 targets out of, even 4 targets, at a price that's $3,700, $3,800 or less, where I can spend up on other positions? Because this week I have some high volume, high price guys I want. I'm not spending more than $4,000 on my tight end. Tunyan's there for correlation. That's fine. I could have used Burton. I could have used Rudolph. I could have used a lot of other players. But for me, it's going to be this week it's Tonyan. But in general, I'm not looking to stack. Like I'm not putting Tonyan and Adams. I'm not putting Corey Davis in with Derrick Henry, even though I like both of them. I might put Ferkser in, Anthony Ferkser, because Jonnu Smith is out. Ferkser's $2,500, but I'm not putting Ferkser in because I want to stack Titans with Derrick Henry. I'm putting Ferkser in because he's $2,500 is going to see 5 to 6 targets. And that extra money, even if it went down from Tonyan at $3,700, that $1,200 could make a difference. I'd much rather have that money than worry about the don't stack rule. That's why this is a guideline, not a rule. But we're not looking to stack. Like I liked the Chicago this week, but I'm not putting Trubisky, Allen Robinson, and David Montgomery in the same lineup. I will have one bear in my lineup because I love the matchup. It's Montgomery because it works best salary-wise for me. Would have been fine with Robinson if things worked out differently, or Trubisky if things worked out differently, but I wasn't stacking. I surely wasn't putting Montgomery and Robinson together. Maybe Trubisky, Robinson? Sure. Not stacking a quarterback with a running back. So that's what I mean when I say don't stack in cash. It's not what I'm looking to do. If you use Taysom Hill and Alvin Kamara a couple weeks ago, you're regretting it. Because Hill was just poaching Kamara. He's killed his value. We just don't need to stack in cash. And if heaven forbid, let's say you're stacking the Bears and the Lions come and play their best defensive game all year, well, then you just killed 3 positions. You don't want to do that. You want to have as many outs as possible. If we can use a poker term, you want as many outs as possible to get to that 150 points. And if you have too many guys going up against one defense, if that defense plays their best game of the year, you're screwed. And you lose all your money. We don't want to do that. We want to make money. Guideline 7, points per dollar matter a lot. That value point, that 3x is great, but what if we can do more? What about getting close to 3x without needing the touchdown? This is where we kind of tie it all together. I'm going to talk about Darren Waller this week. Against pretty much any other tight end. Like Waller is one of my biggest fades of the week. Look, you can see opponent rank versus the position. The Jets are terrible against the tight end. Waller is by far the most expensive and talented tight end on the slate. And he's probably the most heavily used. If you look at target share, he's got 90 targets over 11 weeks. I mean, that's really, really good. But look at Waller's price, $6,100. How often has Darren Waller even come within 2 points of hitting that number? The 18.3 points we need. We need 18.3 points of value. How often has that happened? And I'm including touchdowns. I'm not even talking just straight volume. I'm talking overall. How many times has he come within 2 points of 18.3? He did it in week 11. And he did it in week 2. Twice. Oh, sorry. He did it in week 4 against Buffalo. 3 times. 3 times this year, he's come even within 2 points of hitting value. He's only exceeded value twice. But only 3 times all year has he come within 2 points of hitting value. Now, I don't mind that if I'm spending $3,500 on a tight end, but I'm spending $6,100 on a tight end. I mean, look at TJ Hawkinson. He needs 15 points. So that means how many times has he hit at least 13 this year to get within 2 points of that number? He's done it twice in the last 4 weeks. 3 times in the last 5 weeks. 4 times in the last 6 weeks. 4 times in 6 weeks. Waller hasn't done it 4 times all year. How about Hunter Henry? Hunter Henry, he would need, let's see, we're to the 12, 15.4, so 13.4 or higher. He did it each of the last 2 weeks, and he came real close in week 10. I'm going to count it. He needs 14.4. Is that right? Under 15. Sorry, 14.4. He did it each of the last 3 weeks. Didn't do it much earlier in the year, but I'm looking about, I'll play recency bias. He's done it each of the last 3 weeks. Target volume's there. Waller's done it 3 times all year. Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram is one of the most volatile tight ends in the game. He would need 14.7 points for me to feel good. He did it 2 of the last 3 weeks. 2 of the last 3 weeks he's gotten there. Waller's only done it 3 times all year. Now, I could play this game with a lot of different players. Let's go down to the cheaper guys. Robert Tonyan. How often has he hit his, 9, 10, 11, 11.1? Each of the last 2 weeks he's done it. And he's done it 5 times this year. 5 times this year. Waller's done it 3. I know I'm belaboring the point, but I just need to, I like to show where we're at. Let's see, Burton, 10.5 he needs. Each of the last 2 weeks. 3 of the last 6 weeks. The last 6 weeks he's done it as many times as Waller's done it all year long. Kyle Rudolph. This one's not going to be quite as sexy. Did it last week. 10.2. Got there last week. Hasn't gotten there much other, but you got to remember too, Irv Smith has been playing. Target share is there when Irv Smith is out. I'd rather play Rudolph over Waller. I'm saving almost $3,000. Eifert got there last week. Eifert needs 9. He needs 7 points to get there. He did it 2 of the last 4 weeks. Target volume's there. 4 more every single week. I'd rather play Eifert than Waller. Save $3,100. I can get a real player in my lineup. Even Ferkser. Ferkser, what, needs 7.5? Remember, Jonnu Smith plays, so he needs 5.5. Well, he got there 2 weeks ago. He got there then 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. Ferkser has gotten within 2 points of value more times than Waller this year. Waller will score more points overall. But look, Ferkser gets volume even with Jonnu Smith playing. My point being, points per dollar matter, and getting close to value matters. Remember back to the very beginning, we said, what's our main goal? Is to find as many players who are going to hit or exceed value as possible. Could Darren Waller do it this week? Yep, matchup is there. Matchup is there, volume's there, but also he cost you $6,100 to find out. I'd rather take my chances that Ferkser is going to get there, or that Eifert's going to get there, or that Kyle Rudolph's going to do it again, or Burton or Tonyan, and save $2,000 to $3,000. Waller could pop off and have 25 points. He's got it in him. He's got the upside, but to me, he's like Tyler Lockett. He's a tournament play for me. I'd rather use Hawkinson. Great matchup for Hawkinson, by the way. I'd rather use almost any tight end on the slate in cash than Waller this week because points per dollar matter. He's just not getting there for me. It's happened with Travis Kelce. It was either last year or 2 years ago when he was priced around $7K almost every week, and he hit it like twice all year. He was the highest scoring tight end on the year, but because of how high he was priced, he wasn't hitting value. Same with Waller. And if using Darren Waller costs me the ability to use Derrick Henry or Austin Eckler or one of my other high-priced guys or Aaron Rodgers, if I have to go from in order to use Waller, if I have to go from Aaron Rodgers to Mitch Trubisky this week, is it worth it? Only if Waller hits his highest possible expectation. Got to have a plan what to do with that extra money, but I mean, when we build our pool, we have that plan. So here's guideline number 8. Build a pool, set your core, build your lineup. And I'm not going to go through all the data that I cover, but what I've done is I've identified my pool. These are the players that I think have a reasonable shot to get 3x or more based on their matchup, their price, their recent history. And Aaron Rodgers has thrown 3 or more touchdowns, 8 or 11 games. He scored 23 or more points in 9 of 11 games this year. Aaron Rodgers is as consistent as it gets, and I think he's underpriced at 6,800 against the Philadelphia Eagles team that has given up the 3rd most QB1 performances in the league this year. Kirk Cousins has thrown for 3 or more touchdowns 3 of the last 4 weeks, and he's averaging 24 fantasy points over the last 4 weeks. He's the 2nd most high-volume deep thrower in the league, and the Jacksonville Jaguars are the 6th worst team against deep passes in the league. He's got a great core wide receivers. Mitch Trubisky, he's not very good, but his best game of the year came against the Lions, and he always finds a way to get points. Those are guys that I've identified. I'm going to go with Rodgers, but those are 3 guys that I have identified that, based on their price and matchup and recent history, that I think can pull off 3x on their price points. Ryan Fitzpatrick was considered, but he's no longer starting for Miami this week. It's Tua, and I don't like Tua as much as I like Ryan Fitzpatrick. Fitzpatrick is going to take way more shots down the field. Tua's just not. Tua could have a good game. Cincinnati's terrible, but I just don't feel comfortable putting my pool. Running back, same kind of stuff. I mean, we talked about Robinson and Eckler and their volume. Derrick Henry, my issue with Derrick Henry has always been that he doesn't get a lot of catches, but Mike Vrabel, the coach of the Titans, came out and said we have to be able to throw Henry the ball. He had 4 or 5 targets last week. We've seen 8 targets over the last 3 weeks for him. If he can see 3 or 4 consistent targets, or get 3 or 4 catches a week, based on his ability to get 150 yards and 2 touchdowns in December, I mean, Henry's amazing. So I have no problem putting him in my lineup. Kenyon Drake has been playing well. Again, these are guys who I just have identified based on where they're at. The Jets are a bad defense. And while I think the Jets play well this week, I do recognize that they've not been good against the run. Josh Jacobs is out. Booker is in play. Again, same thing with the receivers. Landry's in a good matchup. Woods is in a good matchup. Tons of targets. Cooks is getting a ton of targets. Corey Davis has been great as the second receiver when A.J. Brown plays. Corey Davis had 10 or more points in every game but 1 this year. 10 or more points that's 2x without even having a stealing game. 3x is within there. Denzel Mims hasn't really hit value, but 10 points each of the last 3 weeks. On volume alone, he's yet to score a touchdown. So any of those games he scores a touchdown, he's at 16. He's sitting at 4x. He's had 7 or more targets in all but 1 of the games he's played this year. Kiki Kuti slid into a role that Brandon Cooks has because Will Fuller is out for the year, so we could see a huge increase. And if he does kind of what Cooks did as the wide receiver too, even without the touchdowns, 10 points seems really reasonable for him. Tight end, we kind of went through all the reasons why I like tight end. Jordan Akins wasn't as consistent, but again, with Fuller being out, there's a reason to use him. And then the defense, as we talked about, I love the matchup for the Seahawks, but I'm using the Jets because they're cheap and they're aggressive. And the Raiders struggled last week coming east for an early game. So that's what we're going to do. So what's my core? Who are the guys that I absolutely have to have? Well, for me this week, I absolutely am going to play Henry. I'm absolutely going to play Eckler. I was pretty locked in at running back this week, and I'm absolutely going to play Montgomery. $5,500. I'm absolutely playing Rodgers. And I'm playing the Jets defense. That's my core. That's where I was at. That's where I'm at. So I'd already identified those guys, and we talked a lot of this video about why I like those guys. So I locked those in. Those are the guys I'm playing. So now I'm sort of, I don't say I'm in the lurch, but I've got some ideas. Now I identified, wow, get that word out, Doug. Trey Burton is a player I really liked. And I told you guys earlier, I spoiled the fun. I'm eventually going to move up to Tunyon. I want a Houston receiver. I want Houston exposure, either Akins, Cooks, or Kuti. I think Kuti, because of his price point at 3,500, allows me to spend up elsewhere. So QT is a guy that I'm definitely looking at here. I love Robert Woods this week because he's just been ridiculously consistent. He's at 27 targets the last 2 weeks. He's getting a far higher snap share than Cooper Kupp these days. And I read a stat that said the Arizona Cardinals are really bad at passes that go less than 10 yards in the air, and Robert Woods has a low ADOT. He catches short passes. He's just going to see a ton of volume this weekend. 6K, under 6K, it's just too cheap. He can get to 18 points on volume alone. He hasn't necessarily, but even if you get this touchdown out of here, these 2 touchdowns, he still has 21 points. You get those 2 touchdowns out there, he's at 16 points. I'm not upset about that. He had 16 last week with that on volume alone. I mean, that's, 3 of the last 4 weeks he's been there. Targets are just ridiculous. I was going to go Devontae Parker is my last play. I like the volume. I like the matchup. When Preston Williams doesn't play, Ryan Fitzpatrick does play. I mean, this is what we get. Fitzpatrick came in the middle of the Denver game. Last week, Fitzpatrick started. 23 targets. He's had 7 the 2 weeks prior when Preston Williams was out. My problem is I just don't think Tua gives him nearly as much to play with. I mean, the catch rate's bad. The target share, or the amount of targets, the volume is lower. I don't know how much they're going to have to throw against Cincinnati. Tua plays a shorter game. He's more of a game manager. Myles Gaskin is back. So I moved off of Devontae Parker, and I went instead to Jarvis Landry. Jarvis Landry is a big target guy. These 2 weeks here against Philly and Houston, they were terrible weather. So those target volumes don't really show me anything. The 2 weeks that do are week 12 and 8 without Odell Beckham. He's got 22 targets. Again, this Vegas game actually was a really high-win game too. So the fact they got 11 targets is great, and the low catch rate doesn't bother me. He's got a low ADOT. Tennessee's awful against receivers, and 8 for 11, 143 and a touchdown. Listen, even without the touchdown, even if he doesn't go over 100, if he just went 8 for 95, that's 17 and a half points. That almost gets us there just on volume alone, especially on last week's price. But even on this week's price, 8 for 90 gets you there. 7 for 100 gets you there. I don't need the touchdown. I think he's likely to get a touchdown this week. I think he's in a good spot to get a touchdown. So I'm using Landry. And that gave me $200 left over. And I said, you know what? At this point, I do like the matchup for Tonyan as much as I like Burton. I think in a vacuum, Tonyan and Burton are real similar guys. Neither are going to break the slate in general. You're looking at 4 to 5 targets, red zone work, good matchups for both. In this case, I'm just going to look for a little more GPP love since I am going to enter this into a GPP as well. And I'll go Tonyan over Rodgers because if I wasn't using Rodgers, I'd still have Tonyan considered as a tight end play. And so that's how I build my lineup. Start with my pool, build my core, fill in the blanks, figure out what I could do. I could have gone Cooks, but if I went Cooks, that's 5,600. So I'd have to, and then let's say I go to Burton. So now I'm talking 4, 6, 800 more. I'd have to find someone at 4,300. So it comes down to, Cooks, Mims, Burton, or QT, Landry, Tonyan. I'd rather use QT, Landry, Tonyan. That's a decision point that we have to have. So you start to play with some of those numbers. And so I decided to go QT, Landry, and Tonyan. I think there's a little more upside there. And that's how I built the lineup. So that's how I build cash. If you have any questions about that, please feel free to jump into our Slack chat at banksterdfs.com or leave a comment. I love comments. Folks, you can find all of our work if you like what you see at banksterdfs.com. We cover every sport: football, basketball, hockey, baseball, college football, college basketball, NASCAR, PGA, MMA, all forms of soccer, EuroLeague, tennis. We have the current reigning and defending FSWA Soccer Writer of the Year in Jeff Kaminsky. I am a previous FSWA award winner for Hockey Writer of the Year. I've also been nominated for Soccer Writer of the Year, DFS, overall DFS Writer of the Year, Newcomer of the Year a couple of years back. We have a bunch of guys who are going to enter to try to get an award this year. We have incredible content. We're just winning money with all the sports, and it's $3.99 a week, not per sport, not per thing that we do with the articles, the player pools, and the Slack chat. You get everything. Everything we do, every piece of content, the videos, the articles, the pools, the chat, every sport, it's $4 a week. You enter a $5 double up on freaking EuroLeague, and you have major money back in your free roll in the rest of the week. And our content is great. Our people are great. I would put our team up against anyone in terms of their level of customer service and their ability to just talk to you, get to know you, and help you through things. You put a lineup in Slack, we'll work with you. You have questions, we'll work with you. We are here to serve you, to help you, and to be part of our community. Check us out, banksterdfs.com. Thank you guys again for checking us out. This was BanksterDFS.com presents Bankster University's How to Build an NFL Cash Game Lineup. My name is Doug Shain. Find me at Bankster17 on Twitter or come to BanksterDFS.com. And best of luck, folks, and we will see you later.